It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. Under oath and under pressure, Boris Johnson's defence against accusations he lied to Parliament over Partygate.
This is complete nonsense. I mean, complete nonsense. I asked the relevant people. They were senior people. They've been working very hard.
The family is now regretting their sacrifice and demanding the former Prime Minister resign as an MP.
It's just soul-destroying when you think about the sacrifices that we've made personally and that millions of people made around the country.
Also tonight, the mystery trust which helped Prime Minister Rishi Sunak earn more than £4 million in 3 years. As inflation rises again, a surprise to many, driven by the increasing cost of food and alcohol. 33 people injured and a major incident declared after a large ship tipped over in Edinburgh. Plus, Prince William thanks British troops in Poland for defending our freedoms as he makes a surprise visit to the Ukrainian border. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30. Hello, good evening. Boris Johnson swore an oath hand on heart today that he did not lie to MPs about parties at Downing Street during lockdown. During more than 3 hours of evidence, the former Prime Minister at times struggled to contain his temper as he insisted, emphatically, that drinks events were essential even during the pandemic. But he refused to name the senior officials who assured him that the gatherings had not broken the rules. Well, we'll hear from one grieving son regretting his sacrifice in a moment. But let's begin with Boris Johnson's defence. Our political editor, Beth Rigby, reports.
Today, a day of parliamentary theatre, but for all the drama, above all, this a quest for truth from a former Prime Minister. 2 o'clock came and time for Boris Johnson to give Parliament and the country his version of events under oath.
The truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Nearly 4 hours of questioning trying to determine if he'd done just that in Parliament back in December 2021.
The guidance was followed and the rules were followed at all times.
Mr Johnson today still resolute.
I'm here to say to you, hand on heart, that I did not lie to the House. When those statements were made, they were made in good faith and on the basis of what I honestly knew and believed at the time.
Accepting he misled Parliament, but insisting it was a mistake, not malicious.
I apologise for inadvertently misleading this House, but to say that I did it recklessly or deliberately is completely untrue.
This committee, though forensic, and when pressed on dates and detail, the former PM quickly uncomfortable. This a gathering at the height of the pandemic and then PM raising a glass and thanking advisers who'd left their jobs.
The photographs show a lack of social distancing of 2 metres, which was required by the workplace guidance at the time.
It was 1 metre we could
So do you accept that you were present at this gathering and that people were not socially distanced while you were there?
I thought it was essential for work purposes. November the 13th was a day in which 2 senior officials, senior advisers in government, had left their jobs in very, very difficult and challenging circumstances. And it was necessary to steady the ship. I accept that perfect social distancing, Sir Bernard, is not being observed, but that does not mean that what we were doing, in my view, is incompatible with the guidance.
I don't think we agree with your interpretation of the guidance.
That a significant moment, the former PM admitting social distancing not always followed, leading to questions as to why he didn't correct what he told MPs.
I understand the point you make. There is confusion between guidance and rules, but you could have corrected the record at that point.
Right. I didn't think there was any appreciable difference because it was our job to follow the guidance as much as to follow the rules. And my view, as I've said repeatedly to the committee this afternoon, is that I believe we were following the guidance.
Defending instances where he wasn't socially distanced, while also at times seeking to pass blame onto those around him.
If a minister cannot rely on the advice of senior and trusted officials when you have to get a huge amount of business done, then it would be impossible for government to carry on.
This, the infamous Bring Your Own Booze event, an email sent out to staff inviting them to gather in the garden of Number 10 in May 2020. Published evidence by the committee shows then Director of Communications Lee Kane expressing concern about a 200-odd person invitation for drinks being somewhat of a comms risk in the current environment.
He was concerned about the optics, not about the rules, and he himself attended the event, and certainly no concerns were raised with me.
If the event had been within the rules, why was he concerned about the optics?
I think, I can't say. I think he was concerned about the impression that people might gain if they looked over the garden wall.
Some of the testious moments came as Boris Johnson was grilled over his repeated defence that statements rules weren't breached were based on assurances by trusted advisers.
Some might see your reliance on the purported assurances you received as, and forgive me, as a deflection mechanism to prevent having to answer questions about your knowledge of these gatherings. Would that not be a fair assessment?
No, it would be a completely ridiculous assessment.
You were there at the time, so it's a bit hard to understand what the nature of an assurance is when you have been there and seen it with your own eyes. I mean, if I was going at 100 miles an hour and I saw the speedometer saying 100 miles an hour, it would be a bit odd, wouldn't it, if I said somebody assured me that I wasn't.
Today, a highly uncomfortable session for this former PM, but no smoking gun. Both sides sticking to their guns, the committee pressing the former Prime Minister on what it believed the evidence pointed to, that breaches of rules and guidance would and should have been obvious to him, while Boris Johnson insisted it really was not. This then a standoff between a parliament trying to assert its authority and a former Prime Minister trying to save his political career. And after hours of evidence, the outcome's still very unclear. One thing is clear, Mr Johnson will not accept the findings of this inquiry if it goes against him, setting the scene for another Partygate showdown. Both he and the current PM could well do without the standoff, but that is beyond their control. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Westminster.
So that was the evidence, testy at times. Now it's over to the Privileges Committee. If the 7 members find that Boris Johnson intentionally or recklessly misled MPs, a sanction will be recommended. That could range from an oral or written apology to a suspension or expulsion from Parliament. MPs will vote on whether to accept the recommendation, and Conservative MPs will be given a free vote. If a suspension of more than 10 days is voted through, then a recall petition will be triggered in Boris Johnson's Uxbridge and South Ruislip constituency. After that, if more than 10% of constituents, that's around 6,700 people, sign the petition, Boris Johnson will face a by-election. Whatever the outcome, the former Prime Minister's defence has enraged many who lost family members during the pandemic. Our People and Politics correspondent Nick Martin watched with a grieving son.
It's been very hard watching Boris stage his defence today. It makes for very uncomfortable viewing.
David Garfinkel and his family, like millions of others, stuck to the rules during the pandemic, while those who made them broke them.
I just don't understand why the Prime Minister of our country needs to be assured by other people whether or not rules were or weren't being broken.
David's dad, Ivor, shielded himself away for most of the pandemic. When lockdown restrictions were eased, he caught COVID, ended up in hospital. His family couldn't be by his side when he passed away.
How does it feel watching this kind of defence being put forward by the former Prime Minister, given the context of everything that you and your family have been through?
I think it's sickening. It's just soul-destroying when you think about the sacrifices that we've made personally and the millions of people made around the country, that the people running this country didn't feel the same way about.
David is now part of a support group made up of those who lost loved ones to COVID.
Has he said anything today that would reassure you that they were doing this in good faith?
No, nothing at all. At the time when people are dying in their thousands every single day, that you cannot understand that you are breaking the rules. It's just incomprehensible.
Is it your view that he's lying?
Yes, I think he's always been lying.
This is one of the ways David remembers his dad, by inscribing his name on the COVID memorial wall on the South Bank in London.
What makes this memorial so sobering, so powerful, is that it's directly opposite the Houses of Parliament, a daily reminder of just how many people died during the pandemic in the United Kingdom. Each heart along this wall is a life lost. And for those families who made sacrifices, who played by the rules, parties in Downing Street, rule-breaking at the heart of government, is an affront to the memory of each person who died during the pandemic.
For the bereaved, there are still more questions than answers. Nick Martin, Sky News.
Well, to our political editor, Beth Rigby in Westminster now. So, more than 3 hours of evidence, Beth. How effective was Boris Johnson's defence?
Well, Anna, I think it's fair to say that he was very well prepared and his defence was multi-layered. I think the first point was that he almost didn't accept the premise of the interrogation, insisting that guidance was followed to the best of his ability in the workplace in which he was working. He also insisted that he did rely on aides in order to reassure him that events were compliant when he wasn't there. And I think what he also did in that was he looked to undermine the legitimacy of the committee, be it talking about some prejudicial remarks he said that the chair Harman made ahead of the hearing, and indeed questioning what evidence was published. But I think in terms of where the committee were and some of the dangers for him, I think the first point to say was in the round, the questioning was pretty hostile, and what I saw was MP after MP incredulous, if you like, when Boris Johnson insisted that it was not obvious to him that guidance and rules were not broken at events he attended, when it seemed that the committee was clear it was. I think on a specific as well, that the former Prime Minister, there was an idea about, was it flimsy defence when he said he relied on political aides for reassurance that rules weren't broken rather than officials or indeed lawyers, given that misleading the House is a very serious matter, and that might lead the MPs to conclude that this somehow was indeed a reckless misleading of the House. I think in the round, I would not be surprised if the MPs come out with some sort of sanctioning for Boris Johnson, but that's unclear. That decision is weeks away, and it could be anything from an apology asked for to a sanction that could lead to a suspension of the House for so long that it could potentially trigger a recall petition in his constituency, which could mean that he might face a by-election. But we've got a number of weeks to go before it's decided. I think what's fair to say is that while Mr Johnson might want to put Partygate behind him, Parliament certainly isn't letting him yet.
Beth, thank you. Well, while Boris Johnson fought to save his career, the current occupant of number 10 published a summary of his tax return after months of political pressure. The document showed that Rishi Sunak earned more than £4 million over 3 years, mostly from a US-based investment fund, and paid over £432,000 to the Treasury in the tax year to April 2022. Our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, has been analysing the numbers.
The Prime Minister on a Christmas visit to a soup kitchen in the middle of a cost of living crisis, eager to show that he has the common touch.
Do you work in a business? Do you want some fruit?
I'm homeless.
But Rishi Sunak's relationship with money is far from common. The long-awaited release of his tax returns show that this Prime Minister is one of the super-rich. This summary document shows the PM made nearly £5 million in the last 3 years. Just over £1 million of this was income, including £329,000 last year from his salary as PM and from shares. The rest, nearly £4 million, was the capital gains generated on a US-based blind trust. Paying just over £1 million in tax on £4.8 million of income means his effective tax rate is just 22%. Capital gains more likely tax than a salary. Far away from the dramatic day in Westminster, the Prime Minister in Wales. Purely a coincidence that his tax return finally emerged with so many distractions in Parliament.
Well, I published my tax returns because I said I would in the interest of transparency, and I'm glad to have done that. Now, I think ultimately what people are interested in is what I'm going to do for them.
Experts say this document gives us a glimpse of significant wealth.
It's clearly a vast sum of money. We don't know exactly how much it is, but it's into the millions, and it could be anything from 5 to 15 to 20 million pounds of wealth. And that's a big number compared to what we've seen in past prime ministers.
This confirms Rishi Sunak is independently wealthy, but we already knew that. What we didn't know is that so much of his wealth is bound up in the United States rather than the United Kingdom, and the bulk of it comes from an American investment known as a blind trust. Now, Rishi Sunak knows what went into that trust when it was created, but we've got no right to know and what generates his cash. For most Prime Ministers, payday comes after high office. For this one, it came before. Sam Coates, Sky News, Westminster.
Well, those details of the Prime Minister's earnings were published as data showed that inflation jumped unexpectedly to 10.4% last month. It'll be troubling news, watched closely by the Bank of England, which makes a decision on interest rates tomorrow. Our business correspondent, Paul Kelso, reports.
It's as hot as a summer's day in the greenhouses of the Lee Valley, but the harvest been delayed in the salad bowl of England.
So our energy bills went from circa £700,000 per year to last year's energy bills just under 3 million, maybe £2.9 million a year just on gas.
They should be picking tomatoes and peppers here already, but heating 22 acres of glasshouse through the coldest months wasn't viable for growers squeezed by higher costs and fixed price contracts from retailers.
We will be looking at obviously energy prices to see when we finish the season. So if come August energy prices are starting to rise, we'll probably make a decision to finish the season early again.
CPI inflation rose to 10.4% in February, defying expectations of a steady decline from recent historic highs. Rising food prices were the biggest driver, increasing 18% and accounting for fully 2% of total inflation.
This increase in inflation has come as a real surprise to economists, and it's food for thought for the Bank of England as it meets to discuss interest rates. They'll have to balance tackling what's happening in here, raising rates to keep inflation down, with the risk of causing more stress in the financial system.
The hospitality industry is feeling it too. The George is part pub, part community hub, but it's squeezed by the competition for scarce workers that's driving up core inflation, as well as food and energy prices.
It's really difficult to find reliable, cheerful, happy, motivated staff at the cost that we can offer. It's simple as that. We're working 24/7 without a wage, minimum wage going up next month.
For the regulars, it's not just the price of beer going up.
I'm a pensioner, and without buying food or anything of that nature, if I don't work, my overheads, my outgoings are more than my income.
Every time I go and do a weekly shop, which I did today, it's £10, £20, whatever more for just the basic stuff.
These figures should end any cosy assumptions about the path of inflation. The campaign against rising costs just got more complicated. Paul Kelso, Sky News.
Along with the cost of living crisis, streamlining post-Brexit trade checks in Northern Ireland has been a priority for the Prime Minister. Today, his new Brexit deal sailed through the House of Commons. In the end, only Eurosceptic MPs and the DUP voted against the Windsor Agreement, 29 votes altogether. But over 100 others abstained, many of them Conservatives, as Ali Fortescue reports.
Are you worried about the rebellion, Mr Sunak?
He's a Prime Minister determined to deliver, to fix the Northern Ireland problem.
Mr Speaker, the Windsor framework represents a good deal for the people and families and businesses of Northern Ireland.
But Rishi Sunak's Brexit deal was today unpicked in the Commons.
We have not yet fully addressed this fundamental problem, which is the continued application of EU law for the manufacturing of all goods in Northern Ireland.
Rejected by some on his own side too.
I think there are things in the Windsor framework that are damaging to the United Kingdom, damaging to the Union, and would actually make the situation worse than the protocol.
The recommendation to the ERG was that we should vote against the SI, so that I think is what quite a few of our members are going to do in a few hours' time.
The most powerful blow, though, may well have been this.
Order, order. We will now suspend the sitting.
The former Prime Minister leaving his committee questions to vote against Rishi Sunak's Brexit deal.
Division, clear the lobby.
But in the end, it was a rebellion contained.
Ayes to the right, 515. The noes to the left, 29. The ayes have it, the ayes have it. Unlock!
The numbers today really mattered. 22 Conservative MPs voted against the deal. There were also abstentions, but crucially, the government did not have to rely on Labour votes, and they see that as a victory.
Boris voted for Theresa May's Chequers deal and put forward the protocol, and he couldn't vote for this improvement. I mean, I'm honestly perplexed and surprised that they didn't feel that they could vote for it. But what we've done here that I'm really proud of is we've reset the relationship with the European Union and with Ireland, and that is going to give us a new basis to have a better partnership outside the EU.
There were high-profile rebels, but this was a test of Rishi Sunak's authority, and he may just have drawn a line under Brexit. Ali Fortescue, Sky News, Westminster.
A major incident was declared in Leith in Edinburgh today after 35 people were injured when a docked ship toppled over during high winds. 23 people were admitted to hospital, some with serious injuries, as our Scotland correspondent Conor Gillis reports.
There is only one question looming over these docks. How did a 3,000-ton ship end up like this? A vessel left tipping, dislodged from its holdings in dry dock. It was a day of high winds and high drama. This part of Edinburgh embroiled in an emergency.
The staff that had been on the vessel shared with me their shock, their complete disbelief that had happened, but also the fact that they were amazed that they'd actually got off that vessel as walking wounded.
This major incident put pressure on A&E departments already under strain. Officials say 33 people were injured. 21 of those were taken to hospitals here in Edinburgh and neighbouring Fife. 12 people were treated at the scene.
The MV Petrel had been used for specialist deep water searches, but it's claimed it's not been used in 3 years. COVID creating what were described as operational challenges.
Yeah, it's very unusual for this sort of event to happen. The most serious dry dock incident of late was almost 20 years ago in Dubai. Obviously, it has been very windy in Edinburgh today, so that cannot possibly be ruled out.
This is an investigation gathering pace. Questions are being asked as authorities examine a vessel now detained as evidence. Conor Gillis, Sky News, Edinburgh.
Now to the race to buy Manchester United. The two leading contenders have reportedly now submitted improved offers as the deadline for second-round bids passed. Well, our sports correspondent Rob Harris can tell us more. So, Rob, who's in the running then to buy the club, and just how big are the figures that are being touted?
Well, there are two known bids. One is from Sheikh Jassim bin Hamad, the Qatari, son of a former Qatari Prime Minister involved in banking in Qatar. The other known one is from Sir Jim Ratcliffe, the man behind the petrochemicals giant Ineos. There is some conflicting information tonight as the deadline passed for second improved bids to be submitted. We had been led to believe by Sheikh Jassim's bid that they had actually submitted their bid, but we are getting a sense that actually there might well have been an extension to bidding. So that's the sense from the Sir Jim Ratcliffe side as well. We're hearing actually that this process could be continuing for longer, and there may well be now an extended deadline for all parties to be able to submit a new bid for Manchester United. The Glazers announced in November that they were open to selling the club or to look for fresh investment, but there is no pressure on the Glazers to sell, so there is no rush for this process. And if United was to be sold, well, it could well be going for more than £5 billion. Certainly the Glazers will want to make a hefty profit on Manchester United being one of the most attractive sports brands in the world. But as it stands now, a confusing situation after the supposed second deadline for bids passed.
Thank you. A 17-year-old youth has been found guilty of murdering a schoolboy in Huddersfield in Yorkshire last year. 15-year-old Kayrie McLean was stabbed to death when he was making his way home from school last September. Another 15-year-old youth had already admitted murder at a previous hearing. The man accusing Gwyneth Paltrow of crashing into him in a ski accident has disputed her counterclaim. Terry Sanderson is suing the Hollywood star after she allegedly crashed into him from behind, leaving him unresponsive with several broken ribs and brain damage. He disputes the actor's claim that it was he who crashed into her, saying it was not plausible with the types of injury he suffered. The hearing continues. Ukraine's president shared this video saying it's a Russian missile slamming into an apartment building in the southeast city of Zaporizhia. But a Moscow-appointed official for the Russian-occupied region claims the building was hit instead by a Ukrainian air defence missile. He did not provide evidence. There's been no word on casualties. Well, across the border in Poland, the Prince of Wales thanked British troops for defending our freedoms in a secret visit to a military base. Prince William was just miles away from Ukraine when he met troops and refugees. Our royal correspondent Laura Bundock reports.
The Prince of Wales coming close to the Ukrainian border and a secret visit to Rzeszów. It's where many Western weapons arrive before being moved into Ukraine. And these are the British troops based there.
Just a big thank you for what you do on a day-to-day basis. You're doing a really important job out here, and defending our freedoms is really important.
Impromptu thanks from the Prince, who praised the collaboration between the British and their Polish counterparts. This was a chance to meet both units, with Prince William warmly welcomed by the Polish Defence Minister.
And for your training? Yeah. Good.
The soldiers here are part of Poland's territorial defence force, delivering aid and assistance to Ukraine. The Prince, we're told, also wanted to shine a light on the refugee crisis, and so to Warsaw, and a centre housing and helping those who fled. Poland has taken in 1.5 million Ukrainians, including Natalia from Kyiv. She says it was a surprise but a pleasure to host him in her room, and they spoke about her journey from Ukraine into Poland. Prince William says the Polish people have shown inspiring humanity.
This visit is more than a show of solidarity for those supporting Ukraine. It is also sending a strong message to Russia and pitching the Prince of Wales firmly against Putin's invasion.
This is royal soft power playing out on a hard global stage. And the conversations about Ukraine will continue when the Prince meets the President of Poland. Laura Bundock, Sky News in Warsaw.